So the principle of nuclear deterrence is that the possession of nuclear weapons will prevent nations from attacking us. Therefore, if Britain's nuclear deterrence was to work, any nation, nuclear or non-nuclear, would not dare attack Britain or its overseas dependencies or territories for fear of complete and total destruction at the hands of one of our 4 Vanguard-class nuclear submarines. These are set to come to the end of their shelf life by the late 2020, and C&D has estimated that its replacement will cost $205 billion. Parliament is still debating on how to replace them. I would like to convince you all, by the end of this talk, that we should not replace Trident. And I might be taking a little risk here, but I'm going to see what your opinions are now, and then ask again at the end, and then hopefully I haven't convinced any of you to sway the other way. So, if you think we should renew Trident, if you think we should not renew Trident, please raise your hands now. If you're unsure, don't raise your hands. If you definitely think we should not renew Trident. Okay, so we've got 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 6. So hopefully I can end up with 6 at the end. Maybe not 6 different people, but I don't know. So, just because the main reason for nuclear deterrence is that it prevents war. That is what the proponents say. But just because we haven't been destroyed by nuclear weapons and we haven't all been decimated by nuclear fallout is no testament to a success. Britain's possession of nuclear weapons did not prevent Egypt from invading Suez in the 1950s. It did not prevent Argentina from invading the Falklands in the 1980s. And it's not like the United States has had much success either. Despite the fact that the UN commander of forces in the Korean War, General Douglas MacArthur, explicitly stated that he favored a first strike policy, attack them before they attack us with nuclear weapons, Soviet and Chinese-backed forces still continued with the invasion of the peninsula. Now let's return to the Falklands, because the war has extremely significant ramifications, because it doesn't just prove that the main justification for nuclear deterrence that the proponents espouse without any real evidence or justification that it prevents war is false, but it also shows that our nuclear weapons that we spent so much money on are actually irrelevant. Because when Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, their planners did not have to factor in our possession of nuclear weapons. Because if Britain was to strike anywhere in South America, it would shut off the thermohaline conveyor, our main heat source for Western Europe. This would most likely, according to climate scientists, have plunged Britain and Europe into ice age and triggered crop shortages and famine across the world. Therefore, no British leader could fire on South America, making our possession of nuclear weapons irrelevant. The same problem occurs when we look at Korea. We cannot fire on Korea because the effects of a strike on Southeast Asia are even more pronounced than the effects of a strike in South America. It would lead to unprecedented crop shortages and famine, which would harm the entire island of Britain and the entire world. So, our threat of a nuclear war to North Korea is laughable, it's empty. And because our nuclear weapons place such a strain on our armed forces, they're such a drain on our armed forces, that our much more rational threat of conventional warfare is also laughable. There's no two ways about it. Nuclear weapons are undermining our stability. They are undermining our ability to combat threats across the world. Many criticize others like me who are fighting for a nuclear-free world as being idealistic, maybe even unpatriotic. But this movement is about security. And that's why I would try to refrain from using emotive descriptors when talking about nuclear weapons. I could have easily labeled them as inhumane, barbaric, genocidal. While that still is true, I've tried to not cloud the argument with emotion, which both sides are all too guilty of doing. Because war thrives on the instability and insecurity and lack of certainty that is created by nuclear weapons. But the fact that they drain so much of our funding for our armed forces shows us that they completely and utterly undermine our security. Because Britain came perilously close to losing the Falklands War. One more troop ship, one more aircraft carrier that was sunk, the war could have easily swung the other way against an economy that was more backwards than the UK and was on the brink of civil war. So that is why we have to not renew our nuclear weapons, because they are undermining us at every step. Time after time, admirals come out and say, do not invest in these nuclear weapons, because our armed forces are not capable of defending themselves when it comes to the worst. It is too easy to hide behind the defense that nuclear weapons keep us safe without any real evidence. And that is why it is necessary to change these perceptions, to have an actual debate around it. You can't just criticize someone who's against the principle of nuclear deterrence for being idealistic or naive. Because that is exactly what you are when you do that. Because you need to consider the logical arguments for and against. So, when I ask you what you think now, after hearing me speak, ask yourself this: what's more dangerous? A nation without soldiers, tanks, planes, and ships to defend ourselves with, or a nation without nuclear weapons? So, let's see. Have I managed to convince anyone? Yes. Phew, a moment of truth there. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say, and I hope, even if you haven't managed to convince you, you're now a bit more open to the idea of nuclear disarmament, and you don't think it's as crazy as many politicians and the media might have you think. Thank you.